The world was quiet on the surface, but beneath it, tension coiled like a spring ready to snap. In the early hours of a gray Tuesday morning, deep inside a secure bunker beneath Geneva, Switzerland, a small group of men and women sat around a long steel table. Screens lined the walls, flashing maps, radar blips, and encrypted messages from every corner of the globe. This was the Global Defense Coalition's Emergency Command Center, known simply as the Hub. At the head of the table sat General Elena Marlowe. She was in her late 50s with sharp eyes and silver streaks in her dark hair. She had spent 30 years watching borders, studying threats and trying to keep peace without firing a single shot. But today, she knew, might be different. On the main screen, a red line pulsed over the northern border of the Republic of Ethel, a small mountainous country that had stayed neutral for over a century. Ethel wasn't rich in oil or rare metals, but it sat like a key in the lock between two powerful blocs, the Global Defense Coalition to the west and the Viridian Empire to the east. For weeks, Viridian military movements had been increasing. Satellites showed new hypersonic cruisers, sleek black vessels capable of crossing continents in under an hour, being moved to forward bases just 50 miles from Ethel's border. Their purpose was unclear, but their speed and stealth made them dangerous. Worse, Viridian state media had begun calling Ethel historically Viridian land, a phrase that sent chills through diplomats in every capital. Confirmed, said Lieutenant Cho, a young intelligence officer without looking up from his tablet. 3 Skyward-class cruisers powered up at 300 hours local time. Engines are hot. They're ready to fly. A silence fell over the room. Everyone knew what that meant. The Skyward cruisers didn't just fly. They sliced through the upper atmosphere like knives nearly invisible to radar, capable of carrying surveillance drones or even small warheads. If they entered Ethelian airspace even for a minute, it would be seen as an act of aggression. General Marlowe stood slowly. "Have we sent the warning?" "Yes, ma'am," replied Ambassador Ruiz, the coalition's top diplomat. 3 times. Once through official channels, once via the Swiss intermediaries, and once directly to Viridian High Command using the old Cold War emergency line. All 3 carried the same message. Any unauthorized entry into Ethelian airspace will be interpreted as an act of war. She nodded. The words were simple, clear, and final. No room for misunderstanding. The coalition had learned from history. Vague warnings led to miscalculations, and miscalculations led to war. But would the Viridians listen? In the Viridian capital of Vostok, far to the east, a very different meeting was taking place. Inside the Obsidian Palace, a towering structure of black glass and steel, Chancellor Kael Vorlan paced the length of his private war room. He was a man in his prime, with a shaved head, a sharp jaw, and eyes that rarely blinked. He had risen to power, promising to restore the Empire's rightful place in the world. To him, weakness was the only true sin. On a massive screen before him, live feeds showed the 3 Skyward cruisers on their launch pads, engines glowing faintly blue in the pre-dawn dark. His generals stood at attention, silent. Only one man dared speak without being asked. General Rurik, head of Viridian Aerospace. "Chancellor," Rurik said, voice low but firm, "the GDC warning is serious. They've upgraded Ethel's radar grid. If we fly, they'll see us. And if they see us, they may shoot." Vorlan stopped pacing. He turned slowly, a thin smile on his lips. "Let them see," he said. "Let them try to shoot." He walked to the window, looking out over the city. Millions of lights twinkled below, but his mind was in the sky. "Our cruisers are faster than their missiles. Our stealth systems blind their sensors. And their leaders?" He chuckled. "They talk of war, but they haven't fought one in 40 years. They'll bluster. They'll threaten, but they won't pull the trigger." Rurik hesitated. "What if they do?" Vorlan's smile vanished. "Then we show the world who truly owns the sky." Back in Geneva, General Marlowe reviewed the final draft of the warning one last time. It wasn't just a message, it was a line drawn in the sky. Cross it and everything changes. She thought of her granddaughter, who lived in a quiet town near Ethel's southern border. She thought of schoolchildren, farmers, shopkeepers, people who had nothing to do with empires or hypersonic weapons. "Send it again," she said quietly. "One last time. Full encryption, priority alpha." The message zipped through secure channels, bouncing off satellites, slipping through fiber optic cables buried deep under oceans. It arrived in Vostok within seconds. In the Obsidian Palace, the alert chimed on Vorlon's private console. He glanced at it, then swiped it away without reading. "They're scared," he told his generals. "Fear makes people loud." "Ignore it. He gave the order. Launch the Skyward Fleet." Mission Silent Eye. Enter Athelian airspace at 600 hours. Deploy surveillance drones over Sector Gamma. Return before sunrise. The generals saluted. No one argued. In the Viridian Empire, doubt was disobedience. At 05:45 hours, the engines of the three cruisers roared to life. Not with fire, but with a low, humming vibration that shook the ground. The ships lifted silently, vanishing into the cloud cover within seconds. Their heat signatures were masked. Their radar cross-sections were smaller than a bird's. To most of the world, they simply disappeared. But not to Ethel. Deep in the mountains, a new early warning station built with GDC help just 6 months earlier pinged softly. A young Athelian technician, barely 20, stared at his screen in disbelief. 3 blips, moving at Mach 8, heading straight for the capital. He hit the red button. Sirens wailed across the city. Streetlights flickered. People stumbled from their homes in pajamas, looking up at the sky, confused. Some saw nothing. Others swore they saw streaks of silver light too fast to follow. Within minutes, Ethel's president was on a secure line to Geneva. "They're here," he said, voice shaking. "The Empire is in our sky." General Marlowe closed her eyes for just a second. Then she opened them sharp and clear. "Sound iron shield," she ordered. "All units to high alert. Scramble interceptors. Notify all member states." The world held its breath. The warning had been sent. It had been clear. It had been ignored. Now the Empire was in Earth's sky, and there was no turning back. The sky over the Republic of Ethel was dark and quiet just before dawn. Stars still shone faintly, and the mountains stood like silent guards along the horizon. Most people were asleep. Farmers dreamed of harvests. Children turned in their beds. In the capital city of Lyria, streetlights glowed softly over empty roads. Then, without sound or warning, 3 black shapes cut through the upper air. They moved faster than any bird, faster than any plane built in the last century. They left no trail of fire, no loud roar, just a low hum that most ears couldn't even hear. These were the Viridian Skyward cruisers, sleek and sharp like arrows made of night. Their mission was simple: fly into Athelian airspace, drop small spy drones over key military sites near the border, and leave before anyone knew they were there. To the Viridian pilots, this was routine. They had done similar runs over other neutral zones before. The Empire always claimed it was for security. No one had ever shot at them. No one had ever dared. But this time was different. Deep in the Athelian mountains, inside a small concrete bunker covered in snow, a radar screen blinked red. The technician who saw it, Kalen, just 20 years old, froze for a second. His heart pounded. He had trained for this moment, but now that it was real, his hands felt cold. He checked the signal again. 3 objects. Speed Mach 8, altitude 80,000 feet, course straight toward Lyria. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't birds or weather. This was an intrusion. Kalen hit the emergency alert. A siren began to wail across the base. Within seconds, the message was sent to Ethel's Defense Command, and from there to the Global Defense Coalition in Geneva. In Lyria, the sirens started soon after. Not the loud wailing kind used in wars, but a steady rising tone that meant air alert. People woke up confused. Some thought it was a drill. Others ran to their windows. A woman named Mira stood on her balcony in her nightgown, squinting into the sky. She saw nothing at first. Then, a flash, like a silver thread pulled across the stars. Too fast to follow. Gone in a blink. What was that? She whispered. Her neighbor, an old man who had lived through the last Great War, shook his head. Trouble, he said. That's trouble flying. Back in the mountains, Kalen's commander barked orders into a radio. Scramble Falcons 1 and 2. Intercept course Delta. And get me Geneva on the line, now. 2 Athelian fighter jets, old but well-maintained, roared to life on a nearby airstrip. Their pilots, Captain Nia and Lieutenant Jor, strapped in fast. They knew the rules. If an unknown aircraft enters sovereign airspace and refuses to identify itself, they must intercept and, if needed, force it to land or turn back. But these weren't normal aircraft. As the Falcons climbed into the sky, their radar struggled to lock on. The blips kept vanishing, then reappearing miles ahead. "They're ghosting us," Nia said over the radio, her voice tight. "Like they're not even there." Below in Larea, more people were outside now. Phones lit up with emergency alerts. Unidentified aircraft in national airspace. Stay indoors. Await further instructions. A school teacher named Thomas stood in his doorway holding his daughter's hand. She was only 6. "Is it a storm, Papa?" she asked. "No, little star," he said, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Just something in the sky." He looked up again. This time he saw it clearly. A dark shape, smooth and silent, gliding far above the clouds. It didn't look like any plane he'd ever seen. It looked like something from a dream or a nightmare. In Geneva, General Marlowe watched the live feed from Ethel's radar. Her face was pale but steady. "They did it," she said quietly. They actually did it. Around her, officers moved fast. Maps were updated. Codes were entered. The Iron Shield protocol, activated just an hour ago, was now in full motion. Naval ships changed course. Missile batteries powered up. Cyber teams began probing Viridian networks for signs of wider attack. But the most important move was diplomatic. Ambassador Ruiz was already on a secure call with every major world leader. The line was crossed, he told them. The Empire entered Ethel knowing the warning. "This is not a mistake. This is a test." Meanwhile, high above Ethel, the Viridian cruisers reached their target zone. With quiet precision, each released 3 small drones, no bigger than backpacks, equipped with cameras, signal interceptors, and AI tracking systems. The drones unfolded wings like bats and began their silent watch over GDC-linked radar stations and communication towers near the border. The Viridian mission was almost complete. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the Athelian fighter jets, Lieutenant Jor's Falcon, managed to get close enough to visually identify a cruiser. He switched on his external lights and radioed in Viridian, the Empire's official language. "Unknown aircraft, you are in Athelian airspace. Identify yourself and turn back immediately." For a long moment, there was silence. Then a voice crackled back, not through official channels, but on an open military frequency. Cold. Confident. "This is Viridian Skyward 1. We are conducting a routine navigation exercise. Your airspace claim is disputed." "Stand down!" The words hit like a slap. Disputed. Ethel's borders had been recognized by every nation for over 100 years. There was no dispute. Captain Nia's voice cut in sharp and clear. "Skyward 1, your presence is unauthorized. You are ordered to leave immediately or be treated as hostile." Again, silence. Then the cruiser banked sharply, not away, but higher, faster. It was ignoring them. Down in Larea, people watched as the dark shape streaked across the sky one last time, heading east. The drones remained behind, hidden in the clouds. The siren stopped. The alert ended. But the fear did not. In homes across the country, families gathered around radios and phones. News channels broke into regular programming. "Viridian military aircraft entered our airspace this morning," a reporter said, voice shaking slightly. "The government confirms it was a violation of our sovereignty." At a small cafe near the city square, a group of students sat in stunned silence. One whispered, "Do you think they'll come back?" Another replied, "They already did," and no one stopped them. Back at the mountain radar station, Kalen stared at his screen. The blips were gone, but the drones were still there, tiny, invisible, watching. He typed a report with trembling fingers. In Geneva, General Marlowe received the full confirmation. She stood and walked to the window. Dawn was breaking now. Pink light touched the rooftops. It should have been peaceful. But all she could think was they were warned, and they came anyway. She turned back to the room. "Notify all GDC members," she said. "The Empire has crossed the red line. Prepare for Phase 2. Phase 2 meant more than alerts. It meant readiness for real conflict." In Vostok, Chancellor Vorlin watched the mission report scroll across his screen. Successful entry. Drones deployed. No engagement, he smiled. "See?" They blinked. But he didn't see the footage from Larea. People in the streets, faces turned upward, fear in their eyes. He didn't hear the school teacher comforting his daughter. He didn't know that Kalen, the young radar tech, had called his mother after his shift and said, "I think something bad is coming." The Viridian Empire had entered Earth's sky, and in doing so, They had awakened something they did not understand. Not just armies or alliances, but the quiet, collective will of ordinary people who loved their home and would not let it be taken without a fight. The sky was no longer empty, and peace, once so fragile, now hung by a single thread. 2 days after the Viridian cruisers flew over Ethel, the world felt like it was holding its breath. In cities across the globe, people checked their phones more often. News channels played the same clips over and over, grainy images of dark shapes in the sky, shaky phone videos of confused crowds in Larea, and stern-faced leaders giving short statements. No one knew what would happen next, but everyone felt it coming. Inside the Global Defense Coalition's command center in Geneva, the mood was tense, but focused. General Elena Marlowe had not slept more than 3 hours since the breach. Her eyes were tired, but her mind was sharp. Around her, officers moved quickly, voices low, screens flashing with updates from every corner of the planet. The GDC had activated what they called Iron Shield, a full defensive posture. Naval ships had shifted position in the seas near Viridian borders. Fighter squadrons were on standby. Cyber teams worked around the clock, watching for any sign of digital attacks. Most importantly, nuclear forces in allied countries had moved to a higher state of alert, not because anyone wanted to use them, but because they had to be ready in case the Viridians thought they could win a quick war. At the same time, diplomacy was moving just as fast. Ambassador Ruiz had barely left his office. He had spoken with leaders from 32 nations in the last 48 hours. All of them agreed on one thing. The Viridian Empire had crossed a clear line, but not all agreed on what to do next. Some wanted strong action. Others feared making things worse. Then came the breakthrough. A GDC surveillance drone, small, quiet, and painted to look like a bird, had been flying near the border when the Viridian cruisers passed overhead. Its job was to watch, not to fight. But during the tense minutes after the intrusion, one of the Viridian ships fired a short warning burst from its rear defense system. It wasn't aimed at anything, just a show of power. The burst clipped the drone. The little machine spun out of the sky and crashed into a forest inside Viridian-controlled territory. Normally, that would be the end of it. But the drone's last signal had been strong, and it carried something important, an audio log. In the recording, 2 Viridian pilots could be heard talking in clear, calm voices, confirming entry into Athelian zone, one said. Copy. Launching Silent Eyes in 10. Remember, no response to hails. We're ghosts. The words were undeniable. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a navigation error. It was a planned mission, a deliberate act. Within hours, the GDC released the audio to the public. The effect was instant. Social media exploded. The Sky Betrayal became the top trend in over 60 countries. People shared the clip with messages like, "They lied to us," and "They thought we wouldn't notice." In Ethel, crowds gathered in city squares, not in anger, but in quiet unity. They held candles. They sang old songs about peace and home. In Viridia, the government tried to control the story. State television called the audio fake, made by Western enemies. They showed images of the crashed drone and claimed it proved the GDC was spying on Viridia first. They sent machines into our land, a news anchor said, eyes wide with fake outrage. Now they blame us for defending ourselves. But not everyone in Viridia believed it. Deep in the capital city of Vostok, a retired general named Miroslav Tanev sat alone in his small apartment. He was 82 years old with a bad knee and a heart full of memories. He had served in the last great border war, and he remembered what happened when pride overruled caution. He had friends still inside the military. One of them, a colonel, sent him a private message. They knew the warning was real. Vorlan called it theater. He said the West would never act. Tanev stared at the message for a long time. Then he did something dangerous. He copied secret internal memos, emails, meeting notes, orders signed by Vorlan himself, that proved the flight over Ethel was approved at the highest level. He added his own note. "I served this empire with honor, but honor does not mean silence when leaders lead us toward fire." Then he sent everything to a trusted journalist outside Viridia. The leak spread like wildfire. Within 12 hours, major news outlets around the world published the documents. Headlines read, "Viridian leadership knew, and ordered the flight anyway. Even some Viridian citizens, reading the truth in secret, began to question their leaders. Inside the Obsidian Palace, chaos erupted. Chancellor Vorlan slammed his fist on the table during an emergency war council. "Who did this?" he shouted. "Find them now." His security chief bowed his head. "We are searching, sir." But the files were sent through an old diplomatic channel, one we thought was secure. Vorlan's face turned dark. He knew what this meant. His control was slipping. If his own people doubted him, his power would weaken. And in the Viridian Empire, weakness was not forgiven. He turned to his generals. "We cannot look weak now. Not after this." General Rurik stepped forward. "Chancellor, the world is watching. If we pull back, we look foolish. But if we push harder, we risk real war." Vorlan's eyes narrowed. "Then let them see what real war looks like." He gave new orders. Troops near the Athelian border were told to move closer. Tanks rolled toward staging areas. Missile units powered up their systems. It was a show of force, a message that said, "We are not afraid." But in Geneva, General Marlowe saw the movements on her screen and felt a chill. "They're not backing down," she said. "They're doubling down." Ambassador Ruiz nodded grimly. "They think we'll blink again." Marlowe shook her head. "We can't." At the United Nations in New York, an emergency session was called. Every seat was filled. Cameras rolled as diplomats from over 150 countries watched the Viridian ambassador take the podium. He spoke calmly, in perfect English. "My nation regrets any misunderstanding. Our aircraft suffered a technical fault and drifted off course. We have recalled the pilots. We ask for calm." But before he could finish, the Athelian ambassador stood up. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a steady voice. "Misunderstanding," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your ships flew over our schools, our hospitals, our homes. You dropped spy machines on our soil, and your own documents prove you planned it." She held up a printed copy of the leaked memo. "This is not a mistake. This is a threat. And my people will not live under the shadow of your sky." The room fell silent. Back in Ethel, people watched the speech on live TV. In Larea, Mira, the woman who had seen the ships from her balcony, held her neighbor's hand. Tears ran down her face, but she was not crying from fear. She was crying because someone had finally spoken the truth. That night, in cities all over the world, people lit candles again. Not just in Ethel, but in London, Tokyo, Nairobi, and Buenos Aires. They didn't know what would happen tomorrow, but they knew one thing. The Empire had been warned, and they had entered Earth's sky anyway. Now the whole world was watching to see what came next. The world stood on the edge of something terrible. In the space of just 12 hours, everything had changed. Viridian tanks rolled closer to the Athelian border. Missile launchers turned their noses toward the west. In Vostok, state television showed soldiers marching in perfect lines, their boots hitting the ground like drums of war. The message was clear. The Empire would not back down. In Geneva, General Marlowe stared at the live satellite feed. Red dots marked Viridian troop movements. Blue dots showed GDC forces holding their positions, but ready. Her hands were steady, but inside her mind raced. One wrong move, one misunderstood signal, and it could all end in fire. Nuclear launch codes had been checked. Submarines were in position. Fighter pilots slept in their cockpits, helmets beside them. In every GDC country, emergency plans were ready. Schools had drills. Hospitals cleared beds. Families packed go-bags just in case. No one wanted war, but everyone prepared for it. Then, on the third night after the leak, something unexpected happened. A GDC stealth drone, smaller and quieter than the one that had been hit, was flying a routine patrol near the border when it spotted movement on the ground. Through its thermal lens, it saw 3 figures in Viridian uniforms, dragging something heavy through a field. They stopped near a shallow ditch and buried it quickly before vanishing into the trees. The drone hovered, watching. Then it sent the coordinates home. Within an hour, a GDC special team crossed the border under cover of darkness. They found the spot, dug carefully, and pulled out a metal case. Inside was the wreckage of the first drone, the one that had been shot down. But more importantly, it held its black box recorder still intact, and on it more than just audio. There were flight logs, mission codes, and a digital signature that could only come from Viridian High Command. This was proof that could not be denied. But before the GDC could decide how to use it, Viridian State Media struck first at dawn. Every screen in Viridia showed images of the drone wreckage. The news anchor spoke with anger in his voice. "Western spies sent this machine into our sacred land. They are the true invaders. The Empire has the right to defend itself." Crowds gathered in Vostok's main square. Soldiers handed out flags. People shouted slogans they had been taught since childhood. "Sky belongs to Viridia. No foreign eyes in our home." But not everyone cheered. In a small apartment on the edge of the city, General Miroslav Tanev watched the broadcast with disgust. He knew the truth. He had seen the orders with his own eyes, and now his country was being lied to, pushed toward a war it didn't need. He made a decision. Using an old, untraceable phone, he called the same journalist who had published his first leak. "There's more," he said, voice low. "Much more." Over the next few hours, he sent everything he had. Voice recordings of Vorlan saying, "Let them panic." Internal maps showing planned drone routes over 5 neutral countries. And even a message where Vorlan joked that Ethel's sky is empty because their gods are asleep. The journalist didn't wait. By midday, the new evidence was online. This time, it wasn't just governments reading it. It was ordinary Viridian citizens, and they were angry. In Vostok, a group of university students gathered quietly near the Ministry of Truth. They held printed copies of the leaked documents. When police tried to break them up, more people joined. Shopkeepers closed their stores and stood in the street. A bus driver turned off his engine and stepped out. "Why are our boys being sent to fight for a lie?" someone shouted. The question spread like wind through dry grass. Inside the Obsidian Palace, Vorlan watched the protests grow on his private screen. His face was pale with rage. "Shut it down," he ordered. "Arrest the leaders. Block the internet," but it was too late. The truth was out. And once people see the truth, it's hard to make them unsee it. That night, something even more shocking happened. General Rurik, the head of Viridian Aerospace, requested an emergency meeting with Vorlan. He walked in alone without his usual guards. "Chancellor," he said, standing straight, "the people are turning. The army is uneasy. Even the border units are asking questions." Vorlan glared at him. "Are you questioning me?" "No, sir," Rurik said. "I'm warning you. If we launch even one missile, the GDC will respond. And if that happens, there will be no Viridian Empire left to rule." For the first time, Vorlan looked uncertain. Outside, the city was quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that comes before a storm breaks. Back in Geneva, General Marlowe received a secret message. It was coded, short, and from a source deep inside Viridia. It said only, "They are close to breaking. Wait one more day." She didn't know who sent it. But she trusted it. She called an emergency meeting with the GDC Council. "Hold all actions," she said. "No new troop movements. No public statements. Let the pressure build from inside their own walls." The next 12 hours were the longest of her life. In Ethel, people stayed home. Children were kept from school. The streets were empty except for patrols. In Lirea, Tomas, the schoolteacher, sat with his daughter, reading her a story about brave rabbits who outsmarted a wolf. He didn't tell her it was a lesson about cleverness over strength. He didn't have to. Then just after midnight, the call came. It was from the Viridian ambassador in Geneva. His voice was different, softer, tired. "We wish to talk," he said. Marlowe didn't smile, but she felt the first real hope in days. "Send your terms," she said. What followed was not peace. Not yet. But it was a step back from the edge. Viridian forces began to pull back from the border. The tanks turned around. The missile units powered down. State television stopped its war speeches and played old patriotic songs instead. Music without words, full of sadness, not anger. In Vostok, General Tanev sat by his window watching the stars. He knew he would likely be arrested soon, maybe worse, but he didn't care. He had done what an old soldier must do, protect his country even from its own leaders, and in Geneva, General Marlowe finally allowed herself to sleep. Just for a few hours, the world was still tense. Trust was broken, but the sky over Ethel was empty again. For now, the Empire had been warned. They entered Earth's sky anyway, and for a moment they almost paid the price. 1 month after the sky over Ethel filled with fear, the world gathered in Geneva again. But this time, not in war rooms, but in a sunlit hall with tall windows and quiet voices. The Ethel Accords were about to be signed. The room was simple. No gold trim, no grand banners, just a long wooden table, chairs, and a single vase of white lilies in the center. On one side sat representatives from the Global Defense Coalition. On the other, a smaller group from the Viridian Empire. Between them sat the leaders of Ethel, their faces calm but their eyes still holding the memory of those dark hours. General Elena Marlowe stood near the back, not as a signer, but as a witness. She wore a plain uniform, no medals. She had fought no battles with guns, but with patience, truth, and nerve. And today she watched as the last page of the agreement was signed by all parties. The accords were clear. No nation could send military aircraft, manned or unmanned, into the airspace of a neutral country without permission. A new Skywatch system would be created, run jointly by Ethel, the GDC, and even Viridia, using shared radar and open data. Any violation would be reviewed by an international panel within 24 hours. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. After the signing, there were no cheers. No handshakes that lasted too long. Just quiet nods and the soft sound of pens being capped. The Viridian delegation left quickly, heads down. Their empire had not fallen, but its pride had been shaken. Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened. The Viridian ambassador, a man named Darian Voss, who had once spoken with cold certainty on global news, walked alone to the Athelian Memorial Garden on the edge of Geneva. It was a small place built after the last Great War, with stone benches and a wall of names. Among them was one new name, carved just weeks ago. Lena Moreau, 42, teacher, Lyrea. She had not died from a bomb or a bullet. She had died in the panic that followed the sky intrusion. Rushing downstairs in the dark, she had fallen and struck her head. Her students had made a drawing of her that now hung in every school in Ethel. Ambassador Voss stood before her name for a long time. He carried no speech, no camera crew, just a single white flower like the lilies from the signing table. He placed it gently at the base of the wall. He did not speak. But those who saw him said his shoulders shook, just once before he turned and walked away. Back in Ethel, life was slowly returning to normal, but not the same normal. In Lyrea, children played in the streets again, but they looked up more often, not with fear but with curiosity. Schools now taught lessons about airspace sovereignty, and how peace is not the absence of danger but the presence of care. Mira, the woman who had watched the cruisers from her balcony, started a community group called Eyes on the Sky. They didn't build weapons. They built telescopes. They held stargazing nights. They taught neighbors how to tell the difference between a satellite, a plane, and something that didn't belong. Thomas, the school teacher, read his daughter a new story, one he wrote himself. It was about a bird who saw a storm coming and warned the whole forest. At the end, the animals didn't fight the storm. They worked together to build stronger nests. Because, the bird said, the sky belongs to everyone. In Geneva, General Marlowe finally took a full day off. She walked through the old city, bought a coffee, and sat on a bench by the lake. The water was calm. Boats drifted slowly. Tourists laughed. It felt like peace, but she knew better than to believe peace was permanent. She thought of the young radar technician in Ethel, Kalen, who had pressed the alarm that changed everything. He had been offered medals, but he asked only for better training and more staff at his station. So next time, he said, we're ready faster. She thought of General Tanev in Vostok, who had not been arrested, but quietly retired to a village in the north. His name was never mentioned in Viridian news, but in secret, people called him the man who saved the sky, and she thought of Chancellor Vorlan, who still held power, but whose speeches were shorter now, his threats quieter. Even empires learn sometimes when the cost of pride becomes too high. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains of Ethel, a new Skywatch station powered on for the first time. It stood on the same ridge where Kalen had first seen the blips. Now its radar spun slowly, not in fear but in watchfulness. On the screen inside, a green line marked the border. Above it, the sky was empty, except for stars and the slow crawl of peaceful satellites. No cruisers, no drones. No lies, just quiet. And in that quiet, people began to heal. They planted gardens where tanks had gathered. They turned old bunkers into libraries. In Lyria, a new mural appeared on a school wall. Children holding hands beneath a sky filled with birds, stars, and one small silver drone. But this one carried seeds, not cameras. The world had come close to the edge, closer than most would ever know. But because someone pressed an alarm, because someone leaked the truth, because someone placed a flower on a wall, war had been stopped not by weapons, but by courage and conscience. General Marlowe returned to work the next morning. The threats hadn't vanished. New ones would come. But now there was a rule, a line, and a memory. The Empire had been warned. They entered Earth's sky anyway, and the world had said, no. Not with fire. Not with fury, but with eyes wide open, hearts steady, and hands ready not to strike but to protect. And for now, that was enough.